You're listening to DecayMag Sessions. The Harrowing.
Hi, honey.
How's it going?
Hey, baby.
2 down, 3 to go.
What time do you think you'll be home?
Got another
Jon coming in, so that'll wrap us for the night, maybe 1.
How long you two known each other?
Second grade.
I saved his ass from a group of bullies.
We joined the force together.
Yeah.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. You're listening to DecayMag Sessions, episode 20. DecayMag Sessions is the podcast in which we take one film, focus on that particular film, break it down with the topics, little nuances behind horror, thriller, and science fiction. We also will be featuring exclusive interview. And in this segment, we are focusing on the upcoming supernatural horror thriller titled The Harrowing, directed by Jon Keeyes. Also featured in this segment, we have exclusive interview with director-writer Jon Keeyes, as well as the lead actor Matthew Tompkins and actress Arianne Martin. In this episode, we have special guests, Everything Horror Podcast team members Paul Dolsky and Tessa Baker. Thank you guys for this episode, and this is also our final episode for 2018.
Well, hello, everybody.
Good day, evening, night, wherever you are.
And Paul and Tessa are going to be presenting their own segment. I'm going to open the platform. We're going to be discussing the various elements of this upcoming film, The Harrowing, which Tessa and Paul, this is a surprise to me. I did not know that December 25th is a great day to release a horror film on VOD, DVD. That surprises me.
Yeah, I never would have guessed myself.
Yeah, that definitely is a shocker.
This film is going to be released via Clay Epstein's Film Mode Entertainment. And in my interview with Jon Keeyes, he had mentioned, it is uncanny, but even he was surprised through his distributors that, yes, this is a key date for horror films to be released, because horror aficionados such as yourself, Paul, Tessa, and myself, we don't want to watch Christmas movies. We want to watch horror. That makes fucking sense right there.
I never, I guess, would have ever even thought of that. But yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we'll probably be open up gift, and then after that's done, and have a glass full of eggnog and maybe alcohol. Some eggnog. We can just sit down, relax, and watch horror films. Wow.
And this is why...
That sounds like the perfect day.
Exactly. This is why the distributors earn the big bucks. I think they have all this psychology thing, this market research on when is a good time to release a film. And wow, Christmas, I would never have guessed.
Like I said, neither would I, but okay then.
Well, for the listeners, The Harrowing, what's it about? Well, here's a synopsis. Haunted by the realistic killing of his best friend, a vice detective determined to discover the truth goes undercover in a forensic hospital and is plunged into his own personal hell where demons might be real. Man, that shit is deep right there. Paul, have you read the synopsis on IMDb? That's pretty deep right there.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at it right now, and I've read it before when you were talking to us about coming on to help you and stuff like that. And, when I first read it, I was just like, okay, like, how messed up can this really be versus something along the line of, have we kind of seen this before? So I was skeptical in a way going into it, because it's like, okay, have I seen this? But it actually from the storyline, I think it's pretty much spot on.
When I read the synopsis myself, I was thinking the same thing. Have I seen this before? And I don't usually get swayed so easily when I read the synopsis. I usually just delve into the film itself. And I was quite surprised. Well, and without further ado, let's start DecayMag Sessions, episode 20.
Segment 1. Character Arc.
In this segment, we're going to be discussing the character arc. And for those listeners who are curious, in recent horror films, we are seeing writers focusing on the character element, whether it may be the antagonist, the protagonist, or both. The psychological and supernatural element are a fine combination in horror cinema because as a viewer, you're uncertain if the character is suffering from a mental illness or is he or she suffering from a haunting, a supernatural entity of some sort. Here's a quote from Matthew Tompkins, who portrays the protagonist in the film The Harrowing. He states, quote, "The Harrowing is carefully constructed to be a powerful synergy of elements that make it one of those rare elevated genre films with a true crossover appeal to a wide variety of hardcore fans," unquote. Beginning on this topic, we're going to be discussing character arc. And that is a term in which the character changes from Act 1 to Act 3. All good movies have this arc. And it's rare the occasion, perhaps, let's say, in the occasional action movie film in which the character doesn't have that type of arc. But 80% of films do. Opening the platform for discussion, Paul and Tessa, who also joins me on the discussion from Everything Horror Podcast. Watching the film The Harrowing, what were your initial impressions on this developing character and how he changed from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie?
I thought it was very interesting how he changed from beginning to end. He seemed of sound mind at the beginning of the movie, and as the film progresses, you see him going into a spiral and declining and questioning things like, who am I really? What's going on here? Like, is this all real or is this all in my head? Right, you, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what you were saying, Tessa, is that, you know, we see this guy who is trying to lead some type of investigation with the prostitute and stuff going on, and then we kind of get this weird scene where he's in the bar and across from, or not really across, but we'll just say across.
Oh, the coffee shop?
Yeah, the coffee shop, trying to get, you know, some drinks for everybody and stuff because it was his turn apparently to buy coffee. But anyway, when it gets to this scene, I myself already am going, okay, who is this bored woman that is reading a damn book? Because I was like, you know, I'm like, I have a feeling because I've seen some movies like this where I'm like, you know, is she going to be the one that's somehow involved in this? And then, you know, for some weird reason, you just get that unblurred focus point camera angle on the lady, you know, reading the book. And then that's really much it. And then as we come back, we see the aftermath of the beginning, which is very interesting. And then, you know, kind of like, once again, Tessa saying, you know, he starts to question everything. You see him start to decline more into the darkness per se, and on top of all of that, with the ending of, you know, the beginning and ending, it was something. I mean, I don't think I really want to say too much right now, but let's just say, wow.
Yeah, I was surprised at that type of ending. I knew something was going to happen at the end with this character, but I did not know it would be such a drastic change such as that. And when I saw the film for the second time, the first time I was questioning, I said, wait a second, it feels too quick, too abrupt to present that type of 360 turn on this character. And then watching it a second time, I said to myself, oh, okay, now things make sense. That's the thing with these type of films. You can't go to the cinemas and watch this film once. You're not going to get it. You have to watch it 2 or 3 times in order to digest all the shit that this guy is going through. And I was really rooting for the guy. And when I saw that final act, I was, oh, come on, really? Wasn't what I was expecting. Tessa, have you noticed lately the shift of films that are really emphasizing mental illness? And in our previous episode, we focused on the film Dry Blood. And in that scenario, the writer, Clint Carney, he used the element of addiction, which is something we don't usually see in horror thrillers.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed in a lot of films lately that psychological elements are definitely present, either surrounding mental illness, like you said. People are either, a lot of movies that I've seen, people are in an institution or some kind of an asylum, or just like people just dealing with mental illness like in their everyday lives. It definitely has become bigger in films, and you see it a lot more frequently now than you used to. And I think a lot of directors are trying to shine light upon mental illness.
Horror is not just about blood and gore. It serves as a great platform, a talking point with social or political situations that reflect our current standing. And I'm glad that writers are now involving mental illness, because it shines a spotlight, like you said, and also we're not seeing the regurgitated content. So one person could focus on addiction, someone else could focus on sleep deprivation or sleep paralysis. So the playing field is wide open. And in this case, with the character that Matthew Tompkins portrays, I'm getting a sense of trauma, guilt, remorse. I say he has a guilty conscience of all the shit that he has done, that he just fabricated this whole scenario in his mind that he's pretty much haunted with demons. Paul, what were your initial perceptions on this poor soul?
Oh man, I mean, there's some great scenes where, once they actually show you what was really going on in this particular fabrication versus what would really happen in reality. Like, you see Ryan in the bed with his wife talking, and then then it actually shows what reality was, which was Ryan actually in his hospital bed talking to the Ella. So it plays out so much with these weird, we'll just say flashbacks or nightmares, really, because if I'm saying flashbacks as a way of saying it's more of a fabrication way of, you think you remember that really happened, so it's like a flashback, and then it's really like that.
It's a different perception of reality.
It just shows a good way of how somebody can fabricate a specific past into what is really going on.
Right.
Yeah, like they can fabricate memories and a life that you're not even 100% positive was actually theirs.
spectacular. Paul, you mentioned also camera angles, and when the writer and director of a specific psychological horror film such as this really does choose the right angles or blurs out a certain individual, that's remarkable, because it just makes you think, what we've seen is real here? What's going on? And that's why when these type of movies, you got to watch it for a second time, because these are little clues or something to guide you along the way to make you think, I don't think this is reality. I think this is all in his mind. And certainly that's the case in the Harrowing.
Yeah, kind of like that clue that I was kind of mentioning to you earlier, Ken, about the whole, at the very beginning of the scene, we see Ryan, like I said, talking with those people with his partner there, Jack. And then as he's on the ground with that specific scene, trying to, defend himself from what's happening, this is me coming to the second viewing of this, is what I'm trying to say to viewers. But I did notice, or listeners, I mean, is that after watching the film the first time, and you start to notice the weird mark that is on Ryan's left forehead, and then when you watch it the second time at the very beginning, that mark is actually not there yet.
Yes, you did point that out, and I did not catch that. So applause to you for having that keen eye there.
Well, when I see something like that in a movie, I hate to say it, but it's almost like, what is that famous word from, I think, I believe it was Robin Williams, actually, in that one specific film. No, not Robin Williams. It was Austin Powers. I forget the guy's name right now.
Mike Myers?
Yeah.
Yes. When he sees the mole and he's like, mole, money, mole. So it's just like me saying, oh my God, what the hell is this thing? So once I noticed it wasn't there in the beginning for the second time around, that's when I was like, wait a minute. So, yeah.
And that's hilarious with that mole, and you see scar. Yeah, okay. That's hilarious. But yeah, it just goes to show you how you have to watch a movie like this more than once. I didn't catch that. You caught it. Now I got to watch it a third time to see what other things that I missed. And these are clues that the writer-director always... I mean, when you're the director of your own film that you wrote, you could really play it however you feel. I think that wearing those two hats come well together. Sometimes they don't, but in this case it does. And
nah, I agree.
And Tessa, I'm going to put you on the spot here. When I was watching The Harrowing, and this also ties in with character arcs and psychology, when the main character, when the protagonist, when he was already admitted to the hospital and he was undergoing some delusions there, it reminds me of the actual... This is not non-conspiracy, actual true, how the government would have patients undergo traumatic experiences and program them to do or commit certain things. Trauma-based programming. Have you heard of that experiment that the U.S. government has done? Because it reminds me of that when I was watching The Harrowing.
I can't say that I have, but I've had suspicions about it. About how people could be programmed in the government, because our government's fucked up anyways. But anyways, yeah, I could definitely see like psychological brainwashing going on within the government, and having like controlling people, like mind controlling people to do what you want them to do, you know, making them go against their own free will of thinking. And personally, I think the concept is fucked up, but...
Well, it can be triggered by anything. It
can
be triggered by...
like trigger words or an image or a sound or anything, really.
Right.
And, you know, like you've seen in movies where, like, they have, like, sleeper agents or whatever, and then they use a phrase or, you know, a sound, and it wakes up the sleeper agent.
Right.
You know, and then they can and then after they get them to do the deed that they want, they can put them back to sleep, and they have no recollection of doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That experiment is MK, the letter M, the letter K, MK Ultra program. One film that really touched on that is The Manchurian Candidate. I think there was a remake with Denzel Washington. That film really emphasized. But for the Harrowing, I see the protagonist was going under some trauma. He goes into a hospital, and all of a sudden he's not who he say he was. To my interpretation, I feel that whatever he went through in the hospital, he must have been programmed in some way, because we see a timeline where this character just flips, and we're what the fuck is going on here? And that sets everything up for the last portion of the film, which is an intriguing 360.
You do notice that Nurse Decker uses a weird, like, syringe gun on him. I don't know what the hell is in that syringe gun.
Exactly.
Probably, like, boosting him up with some kind of freaking
zombie type infection.
like some kind of, like, mind control juice. Like,
exactly.
We're gonna rewire your brain to do what we want, like, to make you believe what we want you to believe.
Exactly. To me, I think to close off the segment, I think, to me, the protagonist, I think he was who he said he was from the beginning, and everybody just mind fucked the shit out of him to think that he's not who he says he is in the end of the film.
Yeah, that was definitely a terrible mind fuck on his part. I felt bad for the guy. I was like, oh wow.
Yeah, I feel that was a good play. That was a good play, especially when.
Well played, Dr. Franklin Whitney.
Yes, well played. I was rooting for the guy, and wow, I tip my hat off to director-writer Jon Keeyes for showcasing such an elaborate character arc. And Jon Keeyes, he is a busy guy. He has a slate of films coming out for the 2018, early 2019 calendar year. He has Doom Room, I think, is a week apart. So The Harrowing is first, and Doom Room is releasing next. Amazing. Busy guy.
Segment 2. Exclusive interviews. The Harrowing director, writer, Jon Keeyes, actor, producer, Matthew Tompkins.
Our first slate of interviews covering the upcoming film The Harrowing features a joint conversational interview with director-writer Jon Keeyes and actor-producer Matthew Tompkins. Mr. Tompkins portrays the main role, the protagonist in the film The Harrowing, Ryan Calhoun. The Harrowing. Once again, the synopsis reads as follows. Haunted by the ritualistic killing of his best friend, a vice detective determined to discover the truth goes undercover into a forensic hospital and is plunged into his own personal hell, where demons might be real. In this conversational interview, we delve into the various aspects of character development, horror cinema, and of course, little bits and pieces of the Harrowing, pun intended, because if you watch the movie, there's a lot of bits and pieces, bloody bits and pieces, that is. In any event, here with great pleasure, I present my conversational interview with director-writer Jon Keeyes and actor-producer And to begin the interview, by the way, my name is Ken Artuz, founder for DecayMag, and thank you, gentlemen, for your time for this interview opportunity.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And to start the interview, a little origin story from you both, how you got your start into filmmaking and also taste in horror cinema thrillers, beginning with Matthew.
Oh, wow. Well, how I got into acting, I guess, would be the easiest way to answer that question. And that was just, I was the little kid in my neighborhood with the Super 8 camera, running around recruiting people into my little movies I wrote. And I'd get them developed on a little corner camera store and then broadcast them on a Saturday night on a big sheet in my backyard, much to the delight of our neighbors and my friends. And that sort of moved into, on some level, I'm sure I wasn't even conscious of wanting to be in films professionally, but I was an athlete through most of high school and college and didn't really declare as a theater major until my junior year of college, and then caught the bug for real and wrote a couple of plays that my university produced back in the late 80s and directed them, and then moved straight to New York City as a writer in residence for an off-Broadway theater. And then an actor around town on stage and in commercials and little TV spots. And then in the early 90s, moved from New York to Dallas, Texas, because I got cast as a regular on 2 TV shows. Back in the early 90s, one of them a children's show called Wishbone, and the other was the old hoary CBS chestnut Walker, Texas Ranger. And always with the intention of moving back to New York, but the work became so steady here in film and TV over the years that I ended up just kind of staying in Dallas and then flying out wherever I needed to go for work, Los Angeles, New York, or wherever, and was basically just an actor in broadcast, network television and films until the early 2000s when I decided to start producing and sort of in a weird kind of way, sort of get back to the little kid who wrote, directed, and produced all those little Super 8 movies, just wanting to have slightly more control over my own professional and artistic destiny. And so I did. And about my third film in, it was a film called Killing Down, an action thriller that another director, writer here in town, a gentleman named Blake Calhoun, had written as a vehicle for me. And while we were on the set shooting, I kept hearing from other people about Jon Keeyes and that he was making these really amazing horror films in Fort Worth that were developing a real cult following, and that he was a go-getter and a super creative guy and was someone that I needed to meet, that everyone thought we would be great collaborators, and everybody was in John's ear too about it. And so Jon came to the set midway through shooting that movie, and we met, and I'm sure Jon would agree it was sort of anticlimactic because, I was working and he was just kind of passing through, and, we didn't make much of an impression on each other other than we liked each other. And then shortly after that, Jon got tapped to direct a movie for New Films International called Living and Dying with Michael Madsen and Arnold Vosloo, as it turns out, a gentleman that's in the Harrowing, and Bai Ling and Edward Furlong. And he tapped me to play his police sergeant in that show. And that kind of started our collaboration. We so enjoyed it that we're, 11 or 12 films in now. With each other and have a really great dynamic with each other. I generally, in our scenario, I'm a producer, lead actor, and he is the writer, director, and also the producer. And we have very different strengths that tend to sort of accentuate what we each do well. And so that, while I keep my hand in as an actor, obviously, and in movies like Sicario and Parkland and Crypto with Kurt Russell, which Jon was a part of, and TV series like The Gifted on Fox and Longmire and stuff like that, my heart and soul now is Wolfman Productions and Highland Mist and producing the films that we make. And I was while I enjoy horror films and always have, and was a bit of a fiend for them growing up. In fact, I was just explaining to my son that he kept asking me, right now my 6-year-old boy is obsessed with Chucky and Child's Play and all of the, and the entire Chucky franchise. And that's graduating into, Michael Myers and Jason and Freddy Krueger and, on down the line. And he keeps asking what is the scariest movie you've ever seen, Daddy? And I have to tell him, at least the movie that made the biggest impact on me in the early 80s that really did give me nightmares was the original Howling, the werewolf movie, The Howling, the original. None of the subsequent movies, but the original was really with Dee Wallace, was terrifying. And so he's not old enough to show it to him yet, but I've always had a taste for it and always been a big genre fan and all of the branches of that tree, fantasy and science fiction and action thrillers, psychological thrillers. But Jon was really the maestro of this particular genre. And the movies I had been producing tended to be slightly more, art house fare. So like, some action components and some thriller components, but they tended to be, not in the horror genre at all. And Jon and I, wanted to sort of combine what we both thought were kind of our own individual cinematic sensibilities. And Jon, came up with the idea of the Harrowing. He's like, look, I want us to try to sort of blend what we do. So let me write a vehicle for you. And, but in the genre that I know very well, and let's make a different kind of genre movie, sort of an elevated genre movie. And so he wrote the Harrowing after a couple of passes, and he can walk you through that. And it just became so much more than we anticipated. So that was sort of my entree into this entire, life as an actor from early on. And then, I wanted to kind of walk you through my friendship and collaboration with Jon as we go forward. We've got lots of movies we want to make, and really, really excited about the Harrowing, obviously.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And then for myself, I grew up just outside of Hollywood, and my grandfather, back in the early 40s, was a background actor, a bit actor. And so I kind of grew up in a family that just loved movies, and we devoured movies and couldn't get enough of movies. But kind of interestingly enough, even at an early age, I got really intrigued by Alfred Hitchcock. The Birds and Psycho and Rear Window and sort of all of those movies, and became really fascinated by, Hitchcock and what he did and the way he told stories, even as a young boy. But it's sort of, funny enough, my aunt, back in the 70s, my aunt used to build Halloween houses back before people did Halloween houses. And so I sort of grew up my whole life, doing and helping her and being a part of these Halloween houses and becoming completely intrigued by Halloween and horror and things like that. And I remember, I would spend nights and weekends with her and my cousins. And back on the old cable days of like On TV and ZTV, we would watch Halloween and Friday the 13th. Those were the two that really stand out for me the most from back then was Halloween and Friday the 13th, and how scary they were, to my young mind, and how interesting it was and how it made me feel. And then at the same time, I was also just incredibly affected by the effects and became really fascinated by the effects. And so I really growing up, I really became fascinated by the slasher genre. And got involved, in high school doing special effects makeup. And of course, I was a big fan of Rick Baker and Tom Savini and folks like that. But it's kind of interesting is I never intended to actually be a filmmaker. I thought maybe I might go into special effects and makeup, but of anything, I knew I wanted to be a storyteller. I knew I wanted to be a writer. So, just kind of jumping forward a whole bunch of years, I became an entertainment journalist writing for Fangoria and Cinefantastique and Femme Fatales and, a lot of the different genre magazines. And I was doing the press junket stuff. And I wrote a horror movie called American Nightmare that I just sort of, expected that I might try to sell it or might try to get somebody to make it. And Brink Stevens, horror actress, had asked, she read it and thought it was phenomenal. She's like, you should just go make this yourself. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Okay, I'll do that. And about a year after making that decision, we started to roll cameras on American Nightmare, and it did really well. And suddenly I had other companies and distribution companies asking me to make horror movies for them. And for me, horror, I'm more intrigued by human horror. I'm intrigued by the horror that exists, the darkness that exists within people. So I would say a lot of what I get attracted to and also end up subsequently making is horror movies that deal more with the darkness within and how we as humans can be our own monsters and creatures inside. So I've done a lot of slasher films and, you know, a lot of movies that kind of work that way. You know, and then just kind of jumping into, you know, Matt said, I mean, Matt sort of just defined how we met and our relationship, but we were doing a lot of stuff and a lot of stuff together. And of course, Matt's got it back, you know, Matt's done a lot of acting as a police officer, or, you know, law enforcement officers and stuff like that. And I had this idea for a script and I was like, you know, I really want to write something for Matt. We've been working together for so long and had done so much stuff together. I was like, I really want to see Matt in a lead role in something that I'm directing. And of course, something that we would be producing together. And so that was sort of how the Harrowing came about. And of course, once again, without giving too many little things away, you know, it was, it's also a horror movie about the darkness within. And so, you know, I wrote the first act of the movie, the first 20 pages or so, and just kind of sat on it for a little bit. And Matt and I bounced some ideas back and forth, and we talked a little bit. And then I think I wrote the entire script. The first draft of the entire script was written in about 6 or 8 weeks. Knowing Matt so well, and just knowing what I was, you know, knowing the direction the story was going. So that was sort of how we took that, you know, our own relationship and our partnership up a notch from just, you know, collaborating on other people's projects to, you know, producing one together, me directing, Matt starring, and giving Matt a vehicle to really showcase how completely talented he is. And a lot of the festival reactions have been just phenomenal on that level of Matt's ability to carry that whole movie with so many emotional arcs all the way through. You know, I can't say enough about how great Matt did in that movie. And I'm so glad we were able to do this together.
Great. Thank you both for the origin story. And also, I'm quite fascinated that a union was found. The stars aligned for you both, collaborating on films and a long-standing relationship. And I find that to be quite important, especially in the horror community, between filmmakers, writers, and actors, that everyone should be helping one another to progress projects and visions and visual narratives. Is quite fascinating and intriguing to hear this story once again, because I've heard it multiple times, these flourishing collaborations.
Yeah, and part of, you know, it was, I think, you know, I mean, Matt and I are best friends, and you know, I'm uncle to his kids, but it was, you know, if you kind of think, you know, Matt and I's relationship and the kind of the way we came up, we had such a respect for each other and each other's work that even early on in getting to know each other, we were helping each other out with our movies. You know, Matt had some that he was doing on his own, as you know, before our friendship had really developed, and I had some stuff going on, and yeah, we would bounce ideas off of each other. We would talk to each other for, you know, counsel and advice, and I think that's in a big way, that's how we developed such a strong friendship, was out of that respect for helping each other. And that's just one of the great things about the Dallas Fort Worth film community, is that it's a really tight knit community. There's a lot of filmmakers there, and those filmmakers are all friends, and we all try to come out and help each other in whatever ways we can. So, you know, just inherently coming up and building our filmmaking careers out of Dallas, you know, helping each other out and supporting each other and wanting everybody to succeed and win has always been, you know, something that's really important to me and to Matt.
Yeah, and I think the key word you use there is career, because it's one thing to, you know, just have some friends that, you know, anybody can get a bunch of their friends together and slap a movie together and throw it up on YouTube or, you know, whatever it is. But if you're lucky enough that your friends are also actually really talented pros at what they do, which I think is a key component in these kind of collaborations, then you can actually have a career, which means your work transcends just, you know, your mom and your friends and the cast and crew who may come see it. It actually becomes a viable, you know, thing that, you know, can take you and your infrastructure to the places you want to go and give you the creative freedom and the financial backing to actually realize some of these dreams that we're not interested in dreaming. We're interested in doing. And that's been for me, sort of echo what Jon said, that's kind of been the greatest boon, the biggest plus. You know, I almost feel like we're kind of cheating somehow that we get to enjoy each other as friends as we do. And we say it all the time, because I had an enormous body of work before I met Jon, as did he. And so we didn't need each other, you know, to get a leg up or anything. What we found is that we wanted to work together because we both had such disparate skill sets that blended really well together. And it creates this really great avenue of freedom that you feel like you can trust the other guy because of the word Jon used, respect. You can see they know what they're doing. And that's key. It's something we always say to filmmakers, maybe younger, that maybe haven't done much yet. I'm like, be very careful that you're not just casting your friends. Mm-hmm. Be very careful that they also happen to be, you know, talented at what they do first. And if they're not, then they can still be your friends, but don't waste their time and yours. You know what I mean? And that's what's been really great about this, is we kind of get to enjoy the ride on both sides of the fence all the way down the line. And about the Harrowing, I just wanted to say, as far as the narrative goes and the challenges it presented for me and the way Jon constructed it, really, first, let me ask you, have you seen the film yet?
No, I have not seen the film yet. That is on my slate of to-dos before the end of 2018.
That'd be all. Okay, well, that's great. Well, we can't wait for you to see it. And it really is, without giving too much away, mm-hmm. It really is, you know, a couple of different films in one. It really does start as a hard-boiled procedural, sort of a cop drama, mm-hmm. That takes a very, very hard left turn into the supernatural. And it becomes the back half of the movie is a vastly sort of different atmosphere, different color palette, different energy vibe all the way down the line. Once Calhoun essentially allows himself to be incarcerated in a forensic hospital to be evaluated for his competency. But in the end, he's actually going in undercover to try to break a case he's pursuing wide open. And that's when, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, that's when all hell breaks loose, to use a genre trope. And it really becomes a completely different kind of movie. And that's all because of the way Jon constructed it. And it was, for me, so much fun to play. And of course, as you know, I'm sure films aren't shot in sequence. So there was an enormous amount of incredibly sort of gut-wrenching, you know, soul-ripping, emotional stuff to play in the movie. And the back end of the film is really loaded with it. And Jon front-loaded our shooting schedule so that the first couple of days, I mean, right out of the gate, were the hardest sort of emotional stuff we had to shoot. So I had to hit the ground at a full sprint, which in the end, oddly, really worked in our favor, because we shot on a pretty compressed schedule, a 15-day schedule. And so by the time we got through that, we were already all, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, a considerable crew and a very large cast. Everybody was already in shape from the gauntlet we ran the first 2 or 3 days. And so the rest of the stuff, the big company moves, the larger locations, the way we were flying through the pages with amazing coverage from our cinematographer, Ron McPherson. It really was we never ran out of gas, you know, for the wrong reasons. We never hit the wall. We were able to cross the finish line with energy to spare, which was really great.
The origin stories you both have hinted on, films of yesteryear, which range from Chucky to Jason, and of course we have the supernatural theme with the werewolf. But I've seen a shift, and I'm grateful for this shift, with filmmakers now exploring, and Jon, you alluded to this as well, the psychological aspect, the human drama element infused in horror. And I'm quite fascinated by this, because in reality, the human factor, the human psyche, human nature is a much more scarier, haunting force than any ghouls and goblins. And how have you infused that into the film?
I mean, I think one of the things, you know, horror traditionally throughout, you know, the history of cinema has always sort of been what has resonated with audiences and what has always sort of been at the forefront of all of that is, it's parallel to what's happening in the world around us. And, of course, the sci-fi movies of the 50s are, about the Russians and Cold War, and, George Romero's, Night of the Living Dead, the social commentary on what's going on with civil rights at the time. And, I think we live, and then just in, technology has increased itself to such a level, between the amount of movies that are being able to be put out, the quality of those movies, the quality of the effects and stuff. I think audiences in a lot of ways have become desensitized to the creature features and the monsters and those sort of horror movies. But what we are faced with is, the real terror and the real parallels of the world around us, and terrorism and random acts of violence and, all those sort of things that are happening in our world that have become really scary. The shootings and mass shootings, and it's, the face of the monster in our world right now, currently, the face of the monster is a human being. And those are the things that scare us. And so I was just going to say, it really is like Jean-Paul Sartre says in No Exit, hell is other people. And it becomes this, John's assertion in The Harrowing is, yes, of course, there are demons of the mind. And in a clinical setting, the idea is to treat them. But are the demons of the mind powerful enough that we've misinterpreted exactly what they are? Can they, while this isn't a creature feature straight down the line, the manifestation, I don't want to give too much away, but any manifestations of, creature-ish things that appear in the movie may or may not be real. And it's all because of the trauma that the main characters suffer, or the way they're suffering, what they, their main character, my character, Ryan Calhoun, he's been traumatized when you meet him by the death of a previous partner on a sting operation that went badly. And it was his fault, or at least he's being blamed for it. And his best friend then, that in the opening sequences of the movie that are extremely violent physically, it's the psychological damage it does to him when he survives it and his partner doesn't, and how traumatized he is again, almost, within the same calendar year, that drive him to become, who he ultimately becomes. And at the center of all that is this quest for identity, and this need to identify not only himself, who is he really, but what is real in general. And, movies like Jacob's Ladder and Angel Heart and all those, movies like that were inspirational for John when he wrote The Harrowing have been compared to it in the critical reviews that have come out from some of these fests and some of these larger critics of the genre that have really liked the movie. They have been saying, if you loved Angel Heart, if you loved Jacob's Ladder, in some respects, if you loved One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you're going to love The Harrowing. And that's territory that was not just fascinating for John to write, but it was fascinating for me to play. Because I wasn't, particularly interested in just being in a creature feature, or I was interested in something else entirely. And that's what this is. It does have the general tropes that I think the genre fans want. But there's so much more going on in it with the dialogue and the characters and how labyrinthine and, how deep it really is on so many different levels that, you've really got to fasten your seatbelt and pay attention from the first frame to the last. Or you're going to be rewinding. Whoa, wait a minute. What? You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what we wanted all the way down the line.
Yeah. And for John, this question, I've seen lately a lot of psychological films really infuse the supernatural. So the viewer, the audience are perplexed. Is the protagonist being conflicted by inner demons, or is it an external antagonizing force that is haunting this particular person? I find that to be truly amazing and intriguing as a viewer, because it opens a thought process with the character. You want to know what happens to him. And in the case of The Harrowing, how important was it to create this complex character arc?
Well, that was the most important thing to me. I mean, you know, when I'm writing characters and when I'm writing movies, I mean, the thing that's most important to me at the beginning and the end of it is the character story. Mm-hmm. You know, as a filmmaker, I'm most interested in telling character stories. And so even though almost, you know, the majority of everything I do is wrapped up in horror, I'm always telling a character story first and trying to create, you know, characters that, you know, are interesting to an audience and an audience is going to care about and want to follow, but also, you know, interesting to an actor to be able to explore and to play. You know, for me, horror is a lot about is human suffering. And there's, you know, just kind of like what you said, I think one of the interesting things about, you know, horror, which is what I was doing with the Harrowing, was this idea, you know, of the human monster and then the interplay with the supernatural. And of course, what we're talking about all of these sort of things, these horrors that are left in our world that are unanswerable. You know, we've been able to define so many other things in our world and, you know, explain things away. But, you know, mental illness, the supernatural, so many of those elements are things that we still can't explain. And so we find them scary. And I think that's one of the reasons why movies like this works. One of the reasons why I was so interested in writing The Harrowing in the first place was to explore what is real and what is not real. You know, and I think that's something I think there's a whole lot, like Matt was just saying, there's a whole lot of interplay in The Harrowing about reality, you know, and what is real, what isn't real. You know, the mind is a very powerful thing, and we're able to, you know, in the way that we perceive the world around us, we're able to manipulate our perceptions of that. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And those are, you know, Jung's shadow self. That's the dark self. That's what we're always battling in our daily lives. And so, you know, it's really fun as a filmmaker, but to be able to create a character where you can really delve deeply into the questions of what is mental illness? Is it mental illness? And, you know, and is the supernatural real, or is it imagined? And so many of those things are explored in The Harrowing and in what the character is constantly, I mean, he's questioning his own sanity throughout the whole movie, you know, and I think there's some very big questions that get answered, in the movie, while at the same time raising some very big and important questions. And that's, you know, I'm a fan of movies that leave me asking questions, not in a bad way, in a good way, but keep me thinking about the movie, thinking about the character, thinking about how I, as a person, can relate to that character. And you know, after people have seen The Harrowing, you know, particularly at the festivals, that's something that they come up and talk to us a lot about is, you know, their own sort of explorations of self and how Calhoun is a character in the story as a whole, and the question of demons is something that I think a lot of people question. I think that's why it makes it personal and therefore such a scarier type of movie. I
reiterate, it's quite fascinating to hear filmmakers approaching that concept. Matthew, when you read the character for Ryan Calhoun, what were your initial thoughts on the conflict in which this character would be facing, the external and internal conflicts?
Well, for me, the through line was what I was going to focus on more than anything, because the biggest question we get, particularly at the end, is, you know, is he sane or isn't he? And I had to know the answer to that question going in, because the movie asks that question in so many different ways and doesn't particularly answer it for anybody. You kind of have to draw your own conclusions. Now, when I've been asked that question, you know, in the Q&As afterwards, or by people that have been at any of the industry screenings, I always tell them what I think, but that really, it doesn't matter so much to anybody but me. And that was just for me to be able to keep my head screwed on straight while I'm playing the role from beginning to end, particularly out of sequence, because shot out of sequence, the film catches Ryan in so many incarnations of himself that it wasn't possible for me to play like I would in a play on stage. And I come from a large background of professional theater where I have the luxury, obviously, of playing a character from beginning to end for 3 hours on stage with a linear arc. And this character didn't have a linear arc. This character was, if you looked at it on a map, I mean, it was the line was zigzagging all over the canvas. And so you just have to decide, okay, if I'm an arrow shooting straight through the heart of that, this is the one the one palpable sense of Ryan everybody always has to be able to hold in their hand. And I've got to be able to hold in my head and heart to play him. And so for that really existed on two levels for me. I wanted, Ryan has a fair amount of, there's a fairly large action component in the film, and he takes a beating in a variety of different ways physically. And so I wanted to get in shape for it, obviously. And there was a certain look Jon wanted, a certain kind of a slightly more, leaner, gaunter, sort of flintier appearance he wanted Ryan to have, because he's a veteran, a vice detective who's really been through it. And Ryan isn't a young guy. Ryan's essentially my age, late 40s, early 50s, and scarred up from life. So there was a physical appearance that Jon wanted me to have, which I think we achieved. And then on the emotional side, just an enormous range that you can clearly see when you read the script. So many different musical notes Ryan has to hit in order for his personality and everything happening to him to have impact. And the stakes have to be high enough that, this sounds obvious, but regardless of how hard I'm working on the performance side of it, if the audience doesn't care about him, the whole thing collapses, like a lawn chair. So that was, I think we achieved that too. Whether or not you believe he's sane or insane, you have to care about Ryan and his well-being. You have to want the best for him as he goes through this stuff. And I'm not going to give too much away other than that. Then that was my approach, was okay. So I'm ready. I knew it wasn't going to be a sprint. Obviously, a movie like this is a marathon, particularly because it's nonlinear. But that was my preparation going in, all the way across the board, of being able to, go ahead.
And I was going to say, one of the things that was so fascinating for us, I think for you and I, director and actor and stuff, was, I remember one of our very first conversations was, we're going to stay away from bravado and machismo. We're going to keep Ryan, we're going to keep Ryan real. We're going to keep Ryan human. We're going to give him an emotional
vulnerable
on it.
Right.
Yeah, vulnerable. Exactly. And so we built that foundation, that through line of who Ryan is as a person. It's what, makes people care about him. But I think the zigzagging nature that was so fascinating was, and it makes sense when a person watches the movie, but frequently, almost daily, there was the question from other actors who were involved. And as we're trying to direct, I'm trying to direct stuff. Is this real? Is this imagined? Or is this supernatural? And, and so we were always kind of having to make sure that we, Matt and I always knew where we were at within the story, and keeping Calhoun true and vulnerable and relatable, while the exterior forces that are pummeling him are coming from a whole bunch of different directions. So it was fun having a straight through line that we could always hold on to as Matt walked that tightrope, while things were being constantly thrown at him, and getting to play with audiences' perceptions of what might actually be happening. And so I think we've got to. Yeah.
I was going to say, to build on that, I think really just having Ryan's boots on the ground at all times, regardless of everything swirling around him in the movie. It's like any world that filmmakers try to create. They'll initially set up, the rules of that world, and you'll buy in and you'll go for the ride as long as those rules don't ever get violated, as long as they don't lie to you. And so we just didn't want, we always wanted you to be able to identify with Ryan with his boots firmly on the ground, to have a bit of there's something that you can always feel is real throughout. And that one thing for me was going to be how Ryan processes it. Right. Because real or imagined, if he processes it, with enough impact, it's going to be real. His boots are still on the ground with it. You've got to live through it with him. And then you'll draw your own conclusions about it as he does. But if it becomes too convoluted, with the performance, that's kind of a weird way of saying stripped down to the studs. He's just always got to be rooted in being, a real person, and with real vulnerabilities. In a way, he's an anti-hero. In a recent interview he did, I sort of compared him in a weird way, not narratively, but his arc a bit to Walter White from Breaking Bad, in that he's a good man that got dealt a really shitty deck of cards, and he's playing them the best he can. But the man he becomes the man he has to become to survive what he goes through is not the guy he is walking out of the back door is not at all the guy he was going in the front.
Mm-hmm.
It changes him as anything like that would. And in so many ways, he's an anti-hero. He doesn't always make the best choice. He can be impulsive. But all he's really trying to do is, honor the death of his best friend and find out the truth and get back to his wife.
Right.
Those are the things that drive Ryan. Honor the memory of his best friend, Jack, who dies right in front of his eyes in ways we won't describe here because I don't want to give anything away, and get back to his wife, who's everything to him. And everything else that happens along the way, as jarring as it is, you got to feel that all the way through. And that's just basically, to answer your question, that's what I carried with me the entire time. As long as I never lost sight of that, those two things that I was dragging through the entire movie, regardless of where we were on the timeline, then it grounds it in reality,
Hearing on the film The Harrowing, it reminded me of an old video game in which it's titled The Suffering, as same narrative with the character really rooted in reality, and the audience, well, in this case, the gamer, can really relate to this character, and they want to know what's going to happen with this guy. So once again, I commend any visual narrative in horror and thriller that really conveys that type of message. Seriously.
Thank you. Well, and I think, I appreciate that. And for me, I think that goes back to, if you think about the movies that are, horror classics, and we'll just kind of, Halloween, Friday the 13th, a lot of those movies that we still consider classics is because they've got a protagonist, they've got a lead character that's relatable, that people understand, that people can empathize or sympathize with. And that's, I think, why there's not as many movies, even in the last 10 or 15 years that are, probably will never become classics because the characters become so stylized and so separate from the audience, that the people can't relate to them. I mean, Hitchcock used to say, every frame I watch, I'm watching from the 13th row of the theater, no matter where I'm standing out on set. I'm watching it from the 13th row of the theater because every frame, the audience has to be caring about and relating to those characters, no matter who they are. And so that's something I've always carried with me as a filmmaker.
Absolutely. And also, as important, the main character, the secondary and third characters, and also the subplots itself all have to entwine in such a sophisticated way within Act 3 that audience could say, oh, okay, this film makes sense. And oftentimes we see in horror cinema, either purposely or not, that is not the case. And it becomes a form of entertainment instead of a form of artwork where the viewer would leave the theater and they would be discussing the events of the film. And that's rewarding in itself, as opposed to someone leaving the theater and say, oh, wow, that was a great movie. The shootout scene was fantastic and the car crashes were great.
No, exactly. And that's the thing. I always want to hear people talking about my movie afterwards. I want them to be discussing it. And, after some of the screenings, that Matt and I have been to and stuff, we've heard, people who may not necessarily realize that we were the filmmakers of it, but just listening to the conversations going on once the movie's over with, once people have filtered away, once people have gone to the restaurant next door. I want people to carry it with it. I want an hour and a half of entertainment for an audience, but I also want it to kind of resonate and sit in their minds and be able to continue to live with them, long after the movie. So that's always important to me. And I love it when any filmmaker is able to achieve that.
Good.
Absolutely.
And for Matt, we're nearing the completion of our interview, but final question for Matt. Being in your career as an actor, have you come across that, or your personal opinion of films, particularly in horror thrillers, that the special effects oftentimes hinder the storyline? Have you ever come across portraying a character in a role like that, and you often find yourself saying, hey, I wish the director would have done this and this and that, or the story would have changed in this way?
All the time. I'd say more often than not. Yeah, the scariest films for me are generally the quietest films.
Right.
The films that have the least, louder, faster, funnier going on. The ones that truly the character studies, that rely on, the visual narrative. We are a visual medium after all, the ones that paint the beautiful pictures with the cameras, that create characters that you invest in, that are, with dialogue that means something, that, where the stakes are actually really high. Because I don't think we can be surprised anymore, or particularly scared, or even overly entertained by CGI or special effects anymore. I mean, occasionally, a new wave of, the technology that's available now, even at the highest levels in the studios, will come along, and you'll, momentarily go, wow, I haven't seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
But none of that, I think all of that pales in comparison to just making a very quiet, disturbing, beautifully acted, meditative character study that, if you're really paying attention, can just rip your soul apart. And those are the films, I think, that have the greatest impact. And I think what you're seeing now occasionally are some of our greatest filmmakers gravitating towards the genre to elevate it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that our distributors reacted to with the Harrowing. It's like when Martin Scorsese made Shutter Island. I mean, think of that film in sort of any of the other kinds of hands that might have made that a far more special effects driven, sort of CGI driven, jump scare driven proposition. Whereas you put it in the hands of a maestro like that, it becomes something else entirely. And I think that's something that has been communicated to us pretty consistently, and from our distributors, is that what they are actively looking for now are what they call elevated genre movies, genres that are definable. They can be identified in, like this one, the horror thriller genre, but are elevated by all the other things that are going on in the movie, from a technical perspective, from a narrative perspective, from a performance perspective. All those things are so much more rich and deep and dense than you generally expect from the genre, that it becomes a real delight for the people that will gravitate towards a film like that, but are wanting more. And it creates crossover possibility, cross-pollination with fan bases of other kinds of films, maybe even the more pretentious art house crowds that would turn their nose up at something like this until they actually see what's going on. And then they're like, wow, okay, so this can be a film for us too. And I mean, Jon, like he said, is a storyteller at heart. And this is one of, I think, I'd love to hear what you feel about this, Jon, but I think one of the most, the biggest swings you've taken narratively, but one of the films that you've made that truly does have its, to use what we used with Ryan, it's boots on the ground throughout, as far as all that goes. It is, I think, his most mature film to date along those lines. It truly is an elevated genre movie in that way.
Yeah, I mean, making intelligent horror movies is always, what I attract to, and I totally agree with what Matt said. I know we've talked about that before. Is that the Harrowing story is a culmination of 18 years of experience and knowledge. And here's what works, and here's what doesn't work, and here's what I like, and here's what I don't like. And I like the way you just said that maturity. I mean, it's the most mature horror movie I've made. Definitely the most intelligent horror movie I made, and it's probably the best movie we've made. It's phenomenal. I think everybody's seeing it, and I can definitely see in it everything we were able to achieve out of it.
I look forward to reviewing it, and it's imperative for us up and coming filmmakers to really focus on emotional content, character development, and of course, dialogue. Dialogue is such an important thing. It has to be eloquent, but at the same time convey the story. And I'm not particularly keen on the horror comedies, but for the horror dramas, I'm very astute with that dialogue exchange on screen. And the final question is an open platform in which both yourself, Jon, and Matthew, please plug in the Harrowing and any other information you care to add, upcoming projects you care to share, and social media handles.
Go ahead, Jon.
Well, so basically, Matt and I have our websites. Mine is HighlandMist.com. That's HIGHLANDMYST.com. Max's Wolf Clan Productions.com. And then we've got, on Facebook, we've got, the Harrowing movie. That's the moniker on Facebook. There's also the Harrowing movie on Instagram. So people can definitely, come to any of those. If they come to either of our websites, they can link to the social media as well. And we're rolling stuff out every single day, with news about the Harrowing. We've got, Matt and I got another movie that we did, called Doom Room that's going to be coming out in January, a little bit later. That's, so we're kind of excited about that, but right now it's all things Harrowing, as a good scary Christmas present for everybody.
There's been an enormous amount of press about it so far, and we share all of those links both on our Facebook pages and then on our company pages and on the movie page itself and interviews, etc. But the big news for the listeners is that December 25th is the day it becomes available on all the major platforms as a VOD purchase and or rental or whatever they want to do with it, upload, download, streaming, et cetera, all the big ones you might imagine on down the line. We can search
Comcast, Amazon, yeah.
Yeah. And then in Canada and in the UK and it's a pretty giant rollout, which we're excited, and that'll continue to evolve.
Right.
As we get into the spring, as the platforms will increase and the deals are struck internationally and all those things, just begin to roll it out even farther. So, but December 25th we're all bottlenecking all of the news and notes and announcements into December 25th, Christmas Day, which oddly enough, as counterintuitive as that sounds to roll a horror thriller movie out like this on Christmas, we've learned that historically it's a really coveted date,
really,
for those movies to come out, because there's an enormous fan base out there that don't particularly want to watch schmaltzy Christmas movies and would like nothing better than to sit down on the couch with a roaring fire and a glass of apple cider and watch a really good movie like this. So that was fascinating to learn. I would never have guessed, but we're ecstatic now that we know historically how they perform on that day.
Wow. And I was about to say, that's a weird date, but you did explain it. And I myself, I don't even partake in anything Christmassy. So watching the Harrowing of a bottle of whiskey, that would be great. Quite fascinating opinions. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Segment 3. Ritual aspects in horror.
All right, guys. Well, how about we talk about the ritual aspects that we see in films, even like The Harrowing. There's different examples of where I've seen ritualistic acts. With Al Pacino, for example, and Keanu Reeves, there's ritual aspects in that film because of like Al Pacino plays the devil. There's like a part in that movie where like his son and daughter have to like sire the next like devil child into the world, and they set up for a ritual for that. So there's an example of ritual in that. And in The Harrowing, you notice in the beginning of the film with the prostitute Bethany, she's in bed with the senator, and he gets up to go take a shower, and next thing you know, she hears a knock at the door and something terrible happens to her, and they come in and find her murdered in a ritualistic sense. What about your thoughts, Ken?
For me, what I find to be real ritualistic is the part in which we see, well, we technically it's not cannibalism, but from the perspective of the viewer in that circumstance, in the beginning of Act 1, we see someone eating someone else, and that ties into being ritualistic, because it could be a metaphor. It could be, is the guy really consuming his soul with the psychological aspects to what we discussed before? Or is he really that hungry of a guy that he's actually eating the guy? But the fact is, cannibalism ties in so well with being ritualistic. on a spiritual level, on a psychological level, on a literal cannibalism level. We have tribes in New Guinea that believe eating someone else, you would take their power or their knowledge. So that was key scene, especially in the beginning of the film.
Yeah, especially with like sacrifice too. That's also considered ritualistic to some religions, like offering up a sacrifice to like their god or their deity, and you know that's ritualistic to them. It's like, oh, we're gonna offer you up this soul, or you know, this sacrifice, and you'll hopefully be appeased by it, and you'll either reward us, or if you're displeased with it, you'll punish us.
Right. The film really touches on a lot of bases there. Yeah, I see your point of view, Tessa.
I mean, Ken pretty much covered it. Like, it could be a metaphor. The only other thing I really could just mention is, like, the last really interesting cannibalism type film that I've seen was Tooth and Nail, which was actually part of the 8 Films to Die For series, if anybody remembers that. But I mean, that was almost like a apocalypse film where there were survivors, but there was, you know, the group that went around and did do cannibalism, because to them that was their way of surviving versus the people who actually wanted real food. So I think otherwise you guys kind of got it dead on from what I would have said anyway.
Like, here's a good example of what I mean by the sacrificial aspect.
The sacrificial lamb, yeah.
Ritual. The Ritual movie that we watched.
Yes.
When they offered up the people that, you know, displeased their god to that forest creature. The forest god, the entity.
Oh, right.
They did that, though, because that way the forest creature thing would leave them alone.
Would be appeased, yeah.
Yeah.
But then again, there's your ritual aspect.
Yeah, I remember that film, right. I don't remember the name, but I do recall watching that film.
The Ritual, it's called.
Duh. Obviously, it's called The Ritual.
It's called The Ritual. It's actually very good.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes,
yeah,
it
definitely
is.
recommend it. Like even in the Harrowing, you noticed how, like, when they would take the patients, down to, you know, the under, like, down below, and they would experiment on them and do things to them, and some of them never came back. You know, they were essentially offered up as a sacrifice. There you go.
Yes.
More ritualistic.
Yes. I did take note of that as well. That spiritual aspect, especially when we are uncertain of what is going on. I mentioned before MK Ultra. When I saw that part, I was like, oh, okay, that's probably some government shills. This hospital's probably a front. And then hearing your point of view with ritualistic aspects, and we see these entities are perhaps really nefarious entities. So it does tie in well. And you picked an interesting perspective for the Harrowing, Tessa. The Harrowing also delves into the traditional good versus evil concept. And for tying in with ritualistic, we see fallen angels, we see demonic entities here in this film, and interesting enough, we see how humans throughout history, from religious standpoints, have interacted with these type of entities in both good and bad contexts.
Oh, very good. Yeah. I absolutely agree. You definitely did see a lot of good and evil going back and forth and appearing throughout the film, which is actually very good elements to add to the film itself. You know, the battling of good and evil. You know, even in our own psyche.
Yeah, and that's what this guy went through. Poor. I keep saying poor guy. He is that's what you call a tortured
you for
soul.
The guy. You really feel bad for him. I mean, poor guy went through a shitstorm.
Yeah, that is. Oh wow, I would not like to be in his shoes. And he talk about ritualistic aspects and sacrifice. I think he sacrificed himself so much. Primarily, his mind is the shit that got sacrificed here.
Yeah, his mind definitely was
disintegrating.
Yeah, it was definitely destroyed, ultimately unraveled, and you can't super glue, duct tape, or gorilla glue that shit back together once it's broken. I felt so bad for him.
That's a nice way to put it.
Isn't that a nice way to put it?
That is a very nice way to put it.
They usually say duct tape can fix everything. Not this.
No, not even Gorilla Glue, like you said. Funny enough, I saw a commercial with Gorilla Glue the other day. I was like, okay, nah, that shit doesn't work. You cannot bind a freaking buggy together and drive it into the. Yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that with this guy's brain either.
Well, I thought overall the use of ritual aspects in the Harrowing was very well used. They didn't overuse it. It was just enough to get you to really look at this film and be like, wow, they're using ritualistic elements. They're using demons. They're using psychological elements, and it ties it all together pretty well.
What about the whole religion aspect to this, where in this movie, The Harrowing, we actually saw a very good use of it, of how they properly used the religion aspect of a ritual scene, per se, while versus other films and even TV shows, such as the recent Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, where they use the statue of how do you pronounce the Baphomet's statue in a negative light. So, I mean, that can cause which it did, an uproar.
Outrage.
Yes, an uproar. So, Ken, what are your thoughts on that? The whole misuse of religion.
Yeah, you bring an interesting point, Paul. And for there's a whole big controversy between the Church of Satan and Sabrina, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And I think using symbolism like the statue of Baphomet in that case, or the Ouija board, is so cliche in horror cinema. You don't need those things anymore. In the Harrowing, we never see the demons tie into a religion. You don't see a pentagram. You don't see some weird shit on the wall tying it to. It's too cliche. And right now, we see a lot of sensitivity. Right now, with people get offended with the little shit anyway. So in the Harrowing, it was great that we don't see that.
No, in this case, it's not going to cause an uproar, and it's not going to have other people say, "Oh my God, you're using this wrong," blah blah blah. In this case, it's its own thing. Mm-hmm. As you said, it doesn't tie into anything. It's not.
There's no religious symbols.
No.
To cause offense to any other religions in this movie, which is really good, because you see so much of it, like you both said, in films and series where symbols and religious relics are misused and tarnished and caused to be seen in a negative light when they're not. Like, I've seen like the Pentacle, for instance, misused in so many movies and turned into a negative symbol when it's not.
When they think of the Pentacle now as a sign of the devil versus what it actually stands for, which is actually a good thing.
It's a a religion based on nature.
Right. And of course, in the Harrowing, we don't see the cliche witch coven, which also ties in that Wiccans are not evil, and we don't see none of that here, which also makes the Harrowing unique because it, as you said, Paul, it's its own thing. And instead of tying into religion, it ties into more psychological, and what the whole basis of the film is about, inner demons, not external demons, using cliches, symbols, and cliche characters or witches and whatever the case may be, a satanic freaking priest and dark lords or whatever it is they call them these days. I don't know.
Some kind of cult or something like that.
This movie would have played out differently, and I think, Tessa, you would agree. Let's say, for example, the writer puts the hospital, the head of the hospital, he was some type of satanic cult leader. I think that would just decimate the story and make it so cliche that people don't want to see it. Here we go again, another one of these bullshit movies.
Yeah, exactly. You know, people would take one look at it and be like, oh, here we go, more bullshit. You know, we've seen this shit before. Like, over-excess, way too much, you know, and they would just be like, I have no interest in seeing this movie all the way through. Like, I've seen enough, I don't want to see anymore, and that's pretty much it.
That's right.
And as an actor, just looking at the cast here, we have one of my favorite actors, too. He plays a bad guy pretty well, Michael Ironside. We have Matthew Tompkins. Then we have actresses Arianne Martin and Hayden Tweedy. If you're going to be a part of a project, especially for horror, you don't want to tarnish your IMDb with, let's say, something as cliche as, oh, here we go, one of these movies about Satanists and witches doing bad shit. I think that's why they're attached to this project. They've read the script, they find it to be original, different concept, and say, hey, I want to be a part of this project. It's unfortunate we see actors and actresses stick to that cliche themes in horror films, and you wonder why. Hey, why can't you progress in your career? Oh, I know, because you're making these type of movies again.
And then that can become the new trend.
Right. Oh, that sounds great. I'm glad that the Harrowing doesn't do that.
I 100% agree.
Yeah, it's definitely refreshing, I'll say that. You see too much of the, you know, ritual, religious, cliche bullshit in movies nowadays, and it's overplayed and overused, and you just kind of get sick of seeing it. And with the Harrowing, you don't have to worry about that. And it's like, I was like, wow, for once they don't use some sort of religious cliche.
or Tessa, religious dialogue. Let's say the demons, we could go into the script again. If it was rewritten and the demons would be like, I want your soul. How many times have we heard that?
Way too many.
Yeah, way too much. One of the most like overused lines in movies nowadays.
Yeah.
I've come to eat your soul, or I've come for your soul, or something like that. It's like, oh, come on now.
Your soul is mine. Yeah, we don't get it.
No, we don't.
Gentleman Paul's inner demon is showing.
Not during the podcast, please. No.
Segment 4. Exclusive interview. Actress Arianne Martin.
Concluding our official coverage of The Harrowing is our conversational interview with actress Arianne Martin. Actress, producer, and writer. For The Harrowing, Arianne Martin portrays the role of Anne Calhoun opposite Matthew Tompkins. In her IMDb, you would see a diverse palette of acting genres. But in particular, one spotlight for me is the exceptional horror series currently on Netflix, The Haunting of Hill House. Arianne Martin also has starred in The Resident, Drive Angry, and she also has a slate of upcoming films according to IMDb. In this conversational interview, we delve into her career, we delve into her role as Anne Calhoun in The Harrowing, and also some inspirational quotes for content creators out there, whether you are actress, actor, director, or writer. Without further ado, and to conclude our coverage with the exclusive interview portion of this coverage, is my conversation with Arianne Martin. First of all, thank you for your time and for this interview opportunity discussing your role in The Harrowing.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
And I'd like to kick off the interview with a bit of an origin story, a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the performing arts.
Oh, yes. Well, it's a long story. Just kidding. Yeah, so I started out, I really had wanted to be a director. And so right out of high school, I kind of followed that path and went to film school and started creating little shorts and films. And then I had made some friends, and they would just, who were filmmakers as well, who'd need an actor or something, and they'd throw me in there. And I really, it kind of awakened something I didn't know existed. And, once you get a taste,
yes,
it was so kind of one of those meant to be sort of things. And, I started to pursue it, and I was able to pay my bills, and people put me in stuff and paid me to do it. And I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, that's great. And it's funny because when I asked the origin story to kick off the interview, 90% of the guests said, it's a long story.
Oh, really? I mean, it's not for the weak of heart, that's for sure,
It's always interesting. I like to start off the interview that way because audiences or listeners to music, if it's a musician, they only see the performer. It's always good to see the human side and the struggle, because to create content or to be in a performing arts, it's always a struggle to find that next gig or to break out into the next role.
Absolutely. And all the work and, blood, sweat, and tears that goes behind, the performance or the passion, And I think audiences definitely feel it. They just, don't see the work that goes behind the scenes for sure.
With your recent work, well, you have a few projects that have released in 2018. The Haunting of Hill House is such a popular series on Netflix.
Yes, and I was very, very lucky to be a part of it. It was a great experience, and cast and crew was just phenomenal. And Mike Flanagan, the director, it was just amazing to work with. And I'm excited to see what he has next, which I believe is Dr. Sleep. The sequel to The Shining, which, could be a scary thing, but in his hands, I definitely trust it.
Absolutely. And the parallel with The Haunting of Hill House with The Harrowing is a good character narrative, and I do enjoy that, especially when it comes to horror. I particularly am focused on the character. A little bit of your character, Anne Calhoun. She plays a very important role in that film.
Yeah, I think she brings a little more of, the background and the humanity of the main character. You see that he has somebody that loves him and cares for him. And so when he goes on this crazy, adventure sort of thing, it takes you back to reality. Like, but he has somebody that cares about him and loves him and who's invested in him. So, you fear for him when he's put in danger and all the, things are happening to him.
Right. I know it's kind of difficult because the movie's about to release on a very weird date on Christmas.
I know. It would be a bloody Christmas.
Absolutely. I just finished speaking with the director for the film, The Harrowing, and also the actor who portrayed Ryan Calhoun. And some great insights on the film. I mean, I just finished watching it last night. And like I said, I enjoy character-driven narrative. What was your opinion when you read the script and you see all this conflict happening to this poor guy? I found him to be a poor guy. Poor soul.
Yeah, for sure. It was one of those scripts, which, in all films this happens. You have the script, and then you have the shoot, and then you have the edit, and then what happens in the final edit can be completely different than, the script or even the shoot experience. But reading it, it was one of those things that I love when there's mystery and things aren't spelled out exactly. Like I like to try to figure it out for myself. And it was definitely a script that I kept changing my mind. I didn't have it figured out in the first 10 pages. I was like, wait, no, okay. But was it? No. So I loved that it constantly had me thinking, and, it never once was predictable. So that's what I really enjoyed about the script.
Right. And just as you had noted, the character that you portray, Anne Calhoun, plays such a vital role for this guy. I think that is the key, that from Act 1 to Act 3, she is the key for his sanity and borderline insanity.
Right. Yeah, it's like the only person he can trust, or can he? Yeah.
Horror cinema always has it's a platform for a thinking tool. Watching the film, after watching the film, I begin to wonder, okay, what was the intended message here? And with all the tribulations that the main character went through, it all comes down to, from my interpretation, feeling guilty, and remorse. Was that something that you came up with as well?
Well, you know what? That's the beauty of art and filmmaking, is that everybody's going to get something a little bit different from it. But I do love that. Absolutely. I think it can be interpreted as an inner demon sort of situation, But that is the beauty of film, is that everybody's going to take away something just a little bit different.
Right. Yeah. I always parallel, especially horror cinema, because it gets such a bad rap because most audiences think it's blood splatter and guts, which we see in this film too. But it's an art form, and you could get many positive message through blood and gore.
Absolutely. And the Harrowing is kind of a little bit of a crossbreed, it's a little bit of, a cop drama. It's a little bit of a psychological drama. Plus, I feel like the horror just adds to the, intensity of the whole thing. So it's a nice mix of all those things.
Right. Yes, it does definitely cross the genres. When I watched the film, I said to myself, this would be quite an interesting film if the protagonist were female instead of, the roles would be reversed.
Oh, I like that. I always love, flipping the gender script, I'm always curious, what if we switched this? How different would it make the movie? And how different would the message be? It's interesting. Yeah, for sure.
And especially with the current landscape right now, we see more female in horror films, really taking the lead in as a director, writer, producer. In most of the cases, a whole film could be female driven, and that's the great thing of the age that we're living in right now. We see that diversity.
Absolutely. And didn't they just have an article that came out and said that female-led films are actually banking better in the box office than male-driven films?
Yes.
Just did the math on that, which is excellent. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah, it's a whole new... it's a new time for that, for sure. So I'll have to talk to Jon Keeyes about that and tell him that's what he needs to do. He needs to cast me in his next
exactly
horror
as the
film.
lead.
We need to flip the script a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and director Jon Keeyes, he's churned out 2 films back to back, and they're virtually 1 week apart. So I'm sure he has a script up his sleeve that you could convince him.
Yes, Jon is... I've known Jon for years, and I've always admired him, and he's so hardworking. He is very detailed, but he's also very efficient with people's time. Like, my stuff was shot, I believe, in 2 days. And when I first saw that, I was like, there's no way we're shooting all of my stuff in 2 days. And you better believe we did. But I never felt rushed. It always felt, he's very patient. Matthew Tompkins, super easy to work with. He's a veteran in the Dallas film scene, and it was just a lot of fun, and we just, like professionals, just went in and got it done.
Having a conversation with the lead, such a cool, laid-back voice, but you see on film is such a different tonality. It just amazes me how performers, actors, actresses really delve into that role and make it so convincing. If they want to be the antagonist, they really go all out.
That's the fun about, being in film and getting to experience all that. I think that's really what draws, artists and actors into this business, because you can be one way and then experience a completely different, personality, job, life, whatnot. And I think it helps give you an understanding and empathy for different walks of life.
Right. That's especially when it involves doing the research behind a particular character. Say, for instance, Calhoun, he's a detective, so I'm sure there was some thought processes behind making that role more authentic.
And Matthew's been doing this for a long time, and he definitely does his homework and make sure that he's prepared for his roles, for sure.
And speaking about directing, what are some of the aspects that you take into consideration when you're the director?
I think it helps having, I think directors who have done any type of acting are definitely a little more sensitive to what the actor's process is and what they need, and if they're in their head, or if it's just, I think it's a slightly different experience, but I don't think you necessarily, I've worked with amazing directors that, could not act their way out of a paper sack, but but they're amazing, and, they're able to get the performances that they need. It's a little bit different of a muscle. So sometimes, especially because the majority of my work is acting, it's kind of just a different side of the brain that you have to flip over to. But it's different. It's a different type of excitement, I think.
I see. It's quite interesting. I've heard various comments of actors who find themselves in a situation where the director will tell them, okay, read the lines and do what you're supposed to do here, which, of course, may happen to an actor's career anytime and point. But it's always good to have a broad spectrum of range. So if you want to be the actor, you could be the director, you could have that sensitivity of what the performer is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. And I highly recommend anybody who is thinking about getting into acting or even directing to work as a crew member in some position as a PA or, you know, somebody who does crafty, or just to be able to understand how important the other jobs are as well. And if you didn't have those people doing those jobs, you wouldn't have a film. And I think it's important to really appreciate and understand what every job entails, and just so you can appreciate even more so. And I think if you just get a taste, or at least are able to experience it, it's going to give you a whole nother appreciation for everybody that's working together, you know, to accomplish the vision of the director and the actors.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I myself, as having experience on a set, I know that it can get chaotic very fast.
Yes. And so many personalities and different, you know, types of people that are having to work together. You know, some sets you become more like a family, and some sets you're like, and I will never do that again.
Yes. And from both spectrums that you described there, it's beneficial because both of them are a great learning experience. One scenario you could avoid, and the other one you would definitely seek out for the next project.
Yes, and sometimes you'd be surprised. I worked on a film. It was a 1920s Western, and we were shooting in Wyoming, middle of nowhere. And one of the crew members, he was the sound guy, he got in a terrible accident and had to go to the emergency room, but he was, you know, completely out. And so we were out a crew member, and one of the girls, she was right out of college. She had just, she came on as like a wardrobe assistant, took his place as boom operator and sound, he taught her how to do it, learned how to do it. She is now working on Academy Award winning films in sound design.
Wow.
So she had no idea that was going to be something that she was good at or interested, but because she was able to step in and had, you know, and he's okay, by the way.
Okay.
he had some stitches, but he's okay. But it opened up an amazing career for her that she didn't even know was something she was into.
Look at that. Well, I bet she's forever grateful for that misfortune on his part. That it would never have happened for her.
Right. Yeah.
And looking at your IMDb, you have of quite a few films in horror cinema. Is this an genre that you particularly fancy, or does it just fall into your lap getting into horror films?
I think it's a genre that fancies me. I just towards the beginning of my career, I was fortunate to get to work on some really great, you know, indie underground horror films, but I've had the most fun making horror films, and I have met some of the most amazing people and amazing fans that just have made the whole experience great. I'm a little bit of a chicken when it comes to some of the really intense horror. I could shoot it all day long, cut off my limbs, you know, kill me a million times. But watching it, on the other hand, I'm a little chicken. I do love, I think I'm more into the suspense kind of intellectual horror, more like The Shining type, alien type horror. I think that would be closer to my particular taste in horror. But I do love and have had great experiences and have a lot of respect for horror films and the horror genre.
Oh, that is so. And it's funny that you mentioned the gore factor, because in the Harrowing, I think there are a couple of scenes where it was gory for you.
Oh, my goodness. Well, it's kind of a funny story. So, like I said, we shot all my stuff in 2 days. And so, there's a lot of wardrobe changes and blood and special effects and all these things. And so we'd shot majority of my stuff, and then it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and now, it was, without giving it away, it was a scene where I'm pretty much covered in blood. And they have this like little, it's kind of like a blood squirter thing. But it was really it was summer in Texas, but the blood was really cold and it came out really fast. And it hit all the warm places, if you know what I mean.
Oh.
And it was so shocking. Like my body just started laughing uncontrollably, and I just couldn't stop for a good 5 minutes. It was pretty intense. And then we shot that scene, and then had to quickly shower, and then it's another scene where I'm talking to my husband, because he's getting obsessed with the case, and they had to put me in a what is it called? When you get out of the shower and you put on a robe. There we go. That's the word.
Okay.
Because my skin was slightly discolored from the blood.
Oh, my God.
So we had to cover, certain parts of the body that the blood didn't come off of.
Oh,
but it was so much fun. I had so much fun shooting this film.
Oh, wow. That is and that reminds me, I heard something quite similar to that. And in her case, she was all bloodied. She was the actress of the film, and she couldn't get the blood off her nails. And the following day, she had to do a model shoot with her hands.
Oh, yes. I feel her pain.
These are the comical sides of doing horror cinema.
I know. I'm like, they have to invent something that doesn't stain, and there's definitely some that don't stain as bad, but I don't know if it exists yet.
But yeah, it should be on the market, I tell you, because of course, I would figure that scene in particular would be the last, because it would involve, you're caked in stuff. And
I thought it would be too, but there was a reason it was scheduled that way. But I was like, what? But we still have. Oh my god! And my hair didn't dry, and that's why my hair is wet in that scene.
Look at that. That should.
But it ended up being one of my favorite scenes. Like, I'm glad. Like, I just was stripped down, and just wet, and I feel like it made that scene even better for sure.
Yeah, that scene should be in the behind the scenes DVD portion of the film. For directing, is horror cinema something that you would like to delve into more?
Yeah, I have had a few ideas that I've been working on, and one is a short that's kind of a sci-fi horror. But it's still in the brain sort of figuring out the storyline and what makes sense. But it's definitely something I have been mulling over for a little bit of time. So yes, the answer to that question is yes.
Oh, that's great. I completely understand. As from a writer, so many ideas just float into your head, and it's just difficult to pin one down and dissect it into a 3-part act, especially for a short film.
Yes, and to make sense somewhat. It doesn't have to be completely coherent, but somewhat.
Right.
Where people are like, what?
Absolutely. Yeah, and for short films as well, it's more of a challenge as a writer because you have to condense the storyline in, let's say, 10 minutes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And a couple of questions to close out the interview. One thing that I like to infuse into each interview is an inspirational portion. What are your advices for those starting out, especially, let's say, women who want to start out in horror cinema?
Well, I think it goes back to kind of what I was talking about earlier. Is it is one of those industries that it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of passion, and really just if you're a writer, write. Start writing, start getting as many things on paper as you can. If you're an actor, start get jobs on crew and find out what the other positions are. Start meeting people, start reading about other actors, watch films, kind of, really educate yourself and get inspired, and directors, get your friends, get actors and start making things. And I think the more you make, the more you're going to be inspired, the more you're going to learn, and just put in the work. Keep, it can be disheartening at sometimes, it can be a frustrating business, but I think if you keep going and you keep pursuing, and it's definitely fulfilling, and something will eventually happen.
That is definitely true. And I also see that volunteering or interning is still an option for actors. Where there are some platforms where they would, just to build up their resume, they could just be a part of the film. There's still nothing wrong with that.
No, absolutely not. Actors, it's kind of almost like winning the lottery. It has a lot of luck, talent, yes. Preparation meets luck, it's right. Kind of that. So it's a little bit of talent, a little bit of, a lot of preparation, and luck. Luck has a lot to do with it. But I think if you really love filming and being on set and just being around it and meeting people, it's definitely something that eventually those relationships can bloom. I mean, I've known Jon Keeyes for almost 11 years, 12 years. We worked on a film, I think in 2007, and we'd been wanting to work together.
Oh, wow.
Again, and finally, the right role and the right film came around, and hopefully we'll make more.
Of course.
Sooner than later.
Right. Oh, of course. Hey, and don't forget to convince him. Lead role.
Yes. No, I might make a phone call tonight.
And this is an open platform portion of the interview, where you get to plug in any upcoming projects that you can share, and the Harrowing and social media platforms.
Sure. Well, most of the stuff that I have coming up, I can't announce yet. I just recently was on The Resident on Fox, so that was fun. I'm on Instagram and Facebook is the one. I'm on Twitter too, but I don't tweet that much. But yeah, so I'm a typical, social media stuff, and you can just Google Arianne Martin, and I'm sure they'll come up.
Oh,
and yes, and a few of my own projects are in the works as well.
Great, looking forward to that. And my wife watches The Resident over the time, so I'm going to let her know. Hey, So it's in this episode, which is looking at IMDb, Heart in a Box. Hey, that's a familiar face right there. And well, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure speaking with you across all these different topics, including the Harrowing. Happy New Year and happy holidays to you.
Thank you, and the same to you.
Segment 5. Demonic aspects in horror.
So, let's get right down to the demons. I think this is going to be like a perfect fit for this segment because of the fact these demons were mostly done with practical effects. But, however, there was one scene that was definitely CGI, and I don't really say this that much either, is this CGI scene actually worked. And it was when Ryan, or Matthew as the actor, stood up and faced his demon. And right there, where you see the demon staring back with the dripping of the black goo and stuff just dripping down to the floor, you definitely knew that was CGI. Or was it really? Because it does make you think, could that actually have been, like, what to say, blood of some sort that the guy was just covered in? So it really does kind of mess with your mind of that one particular scene. But as the demon progressed, you know, you got to see the non-gooey or slimy versions of the creatures, which, as Tessa was mentioning before, when patients were going down into the, the underground laboratory with the doctor with that weird, like, mask and white eyes and a bloody-ass bald head, I think is what it came down to. But, you know, right then and there, as Tessa was also saying with the whole ritual aspect, as patients were not coming back, I mean, it was really interesting, especially with the doctor, Dr. Franklin, who actually said with a scalpel, yes, thank you, that how did he word it? That it was time to bring out your inner demon.
Time to unleash them.
Yes. So, Tessa, what were your thoughts on the whole, bringing out your inner demon?
I thought it was kind of interesting how he chose, Dr. Franklin Whitney chose to unleash the demons out of people. He, used it like even in a ritualistic sense. He shed blood. He dissected them. He experimented on them, and he pushed their boundaries, to flip that switch to be like, oh, we're gonna see what makes you tick, and we're gonna push your boundaries, and we're gonna, open you up and let out your inner demons.
Right. Which also brings to the fact of, like, what you were saying too, where most people didn't come out of or come back up. And is that maybe because when trying to unleash their inner demon, they weren't strong enough? Like, they weren't, their host, the host of the body, will just say, for the demon wasn't strong enough. So because of trying to bring out their inner demon, it actually was too much for them that they died right there. And that would be, like, which we're talking about last segment, would be the ritual. Ken?
Interesting. Now that I think about it, maybe that basement serves as a metaphor there. Now I'm trying to ponder here of what that metaphor could be, because if the patients never came up, okay, perhaps by the end of the podcast I would come up with the rationale behind that. But anyway, Paul, I digress. Going back to what you were talking about with the practical effects, in my opinion, we've seen traditional demons, horns, blah, 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 all this red skin, and we don't know what demons look like. So this is an artistic interpretation. I find the practical effects used in the Harrowing was different, remarkable, And as you noted, the CGI works well here. I definitely don't like CGI, but when it's 80-20, as Sue Sinclair had mentioned in our previous episode, when you have 80% practical effects and 20% CGI to touch up on things, that's a great chemistry. And I think the Harrowing showcases that 100%. I dislike it when indie horror filmmakers rely on CGI for blood splatter and all this shit. It doesn't look as authentic as it should.
I 100% agree with that. And, you know, we don't want that pink blood because then it takes us that right out of the movie. We don't want that CGI creature because it takes us out of the movie. Once we realize it's a CGI movie, then the whole thing can be, in fact, ruined to even watch for the whole thing.
Yeah, I 100% agree there. And these creatures here are, I wouldn't say scary. I'm too numb to what the term scary means, but I would say they fucking badass. I haven't seen a demon creature look like that ever. And the way it reminds me of something from Guillermo del Toro, something that he created in one of his films. It looks that weird.
Yeah. I mean, well, we got to look at it like this. Everybody who has demon, which we all have demon somewhere. If we don't, they're somewhere working in the darkness, waiting for that one screw up of yours. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is everybody has different demons. It's not always the same demon. So the way the Harrowing takes it is this is Ryan's, or in this specific way of putting it, this hospital's demon, which is different from other demons. So that's what I liked about it. Is that is, like you were saying, it's something we haven't really seen for this type of demon, and it is badass. And I like the creature or demon design of this, which I like the weird rounded horn that go all the way around the head.
Right. And going back to another quote that Matthew Tompkins, who portrays the protagonist, he states the following, quote, "The idea of being able to drive the narrative, utilizing all these things to truly put that off from both a commercial and artistic perspective was a fantastic opportunity for us as filmmakers," unquote. And from that quote right there, he uses the term artistic perspective, and that ties into what you were just saying right now, how everybody has internal demons, and however we interpret them to be, let's say as an artistic person or filmmaker, it could be totally different from the next person and the next person. And for the demons in the Harrowing, the way they look, they're intimidating. And also the nurses, the nurses, the orderlies, when they were taking the patients down to the basement, I said to myself, why does this guy look like Sub-Zero or Scorpion from Mortal Kombat?
I didn't even think of that either, and I should have, because I used to be pretty good at
clicks
Mortal Kombat guy.
now that he mentions it, like I
the
can
white
see
eyes
it.
and the mask.
Yeah, I could see it.
Yeah.
But when I saw it the first time, I laughed. But watching it a second time, I say, okay, this could play well, because what the protagonist is going through, he's probably seen these, or they could be looking regular, let's say in real life, but in his mind, they could be as grotesque as that. And probably he played a lot of Mortal Kombat and he made him look like Scorpion. You never know.
Right.
That just makes me giggle. Get over here.
Take your meds now.
Boy.
Sorry.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of funny now that Ken points it out.
We just took a serious topic and made a comedy element.
Not everything has to be so serious.
Well, what about you, Tessa? What are your thoughts on the whole practical effects that we saw and CGI?
I thought the use of practical effects was pretty well balanced, and the fact that there wasn't like CGI in excess was it was great. I mean, they used just enough CGI when they needed to use it, and they didn't, over CGI use of the demon. They only used it when they needed to use it, and it was tasteful the way that they did it. It wasn't like too much. And the use of practical effects were really nice. Like the blood looked like blood. It looked believable. It wasn't like you guys said, it wasn't too pink. It actually looked like real blood, and the dismemberment of the body parts and things like that looked real. Like the demon nomming on one of the patient's guts in the underground laboratory, the entrails on that patient, that looked real. Like the use of practical effects, it was good. It was well balanced. So that's my thoughts.
Now that you mention it, Paul, we're talking here about demonic aspects or demon aspects in the Harrowing. Not all the demons were demons and grotesque. We have a wide variety of what the demons were. If you really come to think of it, we could also include his wife into it. She's human, but she's also part of what sets everything in motion. That could be a demon in itself, from a symbolistic standpoint.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
Not all demons are ugly and grotesque. Some of them go walking around in human skin.
Yes. And
like American Horror Story says, not all monsters are human.
All right, I gotta throw it out there before I would the quote that I was gonna use. So there's a band Werrick that I think fits perfect for this, and the whole entire quote goes, "Look out, look by your side. Sometimes the devil wears a pretty disguise." So I just had to throw that in there because I think that worked perfect.
That fit. Well, that quote fit with the character Ella, portrayed by Hayden Tweedy. She
was a necrophiliac and a nymphomaniac. That's interesting.
With the whole "would you fuck me if I were dead" thing. Oh yeah.
Yeah. She killed her. She killed her doctor and then screwed his corpse. She was found screwing his corpse. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
She was an interesting character.
That she could be classified as a demon too. And
yeah, she very well could.
We could delve into some psychological analyst here of this film.
Yeah, we could really pick apart the psychological aspects of this film big time.
But yeah, amazing special and practical effects. I gotta agree with you, Paul. And that's something you don't see every day in indie horror. So that well balanced chemistry.
Exactly. I think most films lack that when they're trying to portray something like that. Really, like the ingredient is there, but sometimes it can be a missed opportunity.
Right. And Paul, you mentioned the blood and guts portion for this film. That in our interview with Arianne Martin, who portrays the wife Anne Calhoun, she she mentioned one part that was the blooper reel for her. Was one part in particular, Paul and Tessa, that we see the wife, she is not in good condition. She's on the bed, and not to reveal too much, but she's not looking too good there. In that scene in particular, she was laughing during the shoot because the blood malfunctioned somehow, and it just squirted all over her and went into areas that we cannot mention. But it was it was warm in that area, and the blood was cold, so it made her laugh. It was ticklish, so she had to hold that in until the director said cut, and she just burst out laughing. So that's one aspect right there. You don't hear that every day.
That holds some pretty good composure then.
I found that to be hilarious.
Props for you. Props.
Yeah.
That's what you call
Arianne Martin.
That is a fine actress right there. Oh wow. A behind the scenes tidbit. Cold blood in warm areas makes you laugh.
I actually thought it was pretty interesting when I read up that she was actually in The Haunting of Hill House. I pointed that out to Paul, and I was like, look at this. And he goes, oh.
So the last thing I just want to talk to each of you about for final thoughts is, so at the very end of the film, where we finally really see what goes down, there's one particular scene which I will not mention who it is or anything because I don't want to spoil too much either. But one thing that I find with the practical effects when it came to the blood is right as the guy got his throat slit and then his mouth is gushing out all that blood. That was the only time where I was kind of just like, whoa, I think that might be too much blood, because I'm pretty sure we're not going to have a mouthful of blood like that as far as throats were slit.
Yeah, it was definitely way too much blood. It was like a geyser of blood for having your throat slashed. I can understand like some blood coming out of your mouth, like you coughing up blood because your throat's slashed, but you would think more of the blood would actually come out of the wound
throat
itself versus your mouth.
Yeah,
right. Well, I've seen worse in other films. I've seen the victim get their throat slashed, and all of a sudden you see an endless stream of I don't know what prosthetic they had under there, but it was just a water fountain spewing out of their neck. And I'm no doctor, and Stephen Gillespie from Possessed Radio is not here to clarify on how the blood splatter should be looking here, but I know it's not going to look like a water fountain spewing out of your neck uncontrollably. There has to be some type of level of realism there.
I wish it wasn't spraying blood.
I think they were going for visual impact there. That's what I think.
Yeah, but there's a way that you can still get visual impact without having to go overboard with it and give way too much excess.
Right.
You know, you can give just the right amount of blood just to, get the point across, and it can still be like well done and not look like, oh, this is totally unrealistic.
That's just
there's like no way that somebody would be like losing like gallons and gallons of blood like continuously out of like one orifice.
Hopefully not. No. Wow. It's interesting. You got. Yeah. Wow. I'm trying to compose my laughter. The word orifice just sounded so funny there. But anyway.
Well, technically, the mouth is an orifice.
Yes. That's interesting because
your eyes sockets. Hair is an orifice.
I think you're getting way too much technical and
Well, you just talk about orifice, and I had to.
No, you did not have to shine in on it. Ken, we're trying to wrap this up, I think.
Oh, wow. Hilarious. That also ties in. I did not see no comedic element. I mean, we hear laughing about a particular scene, but in the Harrowing, this is the first film that I see from beginning to end is just demons and gore and psychology. There was no comedic element at all.
Which I liked about it.
That's unorthodox. Usually in horror films we see some type of comedy just like how we're having right now, and that breaks up the tension. Tense film.
I guess we are pretty much putting in our 2 cents ourselves to add to the comedic. Add our own little comedic flair to it, I guess. I don't know.
But yeah, Paul, on before we digress, what you were mentioning, from my perspective, I think the visual impact, they wanted to go a little bit overboard. I understand Tessa's point of view. It shouldn't have been. Should have been more realism. But overall, I'm satisfied. At least it looks the way it should with the practical and CGI and this whole topic we're discussing. And hey, those demons look badass.
Final thoughts. Closing remarks.
And to close out DecayMag Sessions episode 20, in which we discussed the Harrowing, closing remarks. First of all, thank you, Paul Dosky, Tessa Baker from Everything Horror Podcast for your input and for the segments that you have presented on the Harrowing.
Oh,
you're so welcome.
You're very welcome, Ken. Thank you very much for having us.
It was an honor.
You're welcome. And closing remarks. What can we say about the Harrowing? From my perspective, I think we all agree this is a unique film, and hopefully it won't fly under the radar.
I certainly hope not. This definitely needs to be.
It needs to be spread
out
around.
in the spotlight.
Yeah, everyone's got to see it.
Yes, and for my final thoughts of this film is that the Harrowing is going to be probably the next supernatural thriller that we all want to have more of.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And I had mentioned the cast in the second segment. The second segment. And we have a roster here of very talented actors that really portray these roles phenomenally. And perhaps audiences may say, oh, the acting's kind of shaky, the acting's kind of shady. No. I think the acting is just right. It may have its elements of, questionable emotional content, but you overlook it because overall, the story is unique. And we also touched on how the ritualistic and the demonic aspect of the film are the highlights, especially practical effects.
Yeah, I was just about to say, we all got to appreciate the practical effects in this film just because of how well done it is and how they made them feel believable.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to appreciate about the film, The Harrowing.
And Tessa, what were your thoughts again? I don't think you added your thoughts. So what did you think of The Harrowing?
I thought it was very well done. I'm glad that they didn't use religious cliches in the film, and the practical effects were well done. It wasn't too much, and it looked believable. And I also liked the fact that there wasn't a lot of CGI in the film. There was just enough. It was tasteful. It was well placed. The storyline was really good too. I felt awful for the protagonist. by the end of it. But I thought overall it was really good, and I would recommend that you guys go out and see it when it comes out.
Right, and as I'd mentioned, it releases on a weird date. VOD, on demand, Christmas Day, via Clay Epstein's Film Mode Entertainment. Oh,
well,
wow.
there you go, guys. Get your cup of eggnog and go watch it on Christmas Day after you open your presents.
Exactly. And get the alcohol with the eggnog. I mean, yeah.
Add a little spice to your eggnog.
Spice. Yeah.
I'm already starting. I have 2 bottles of whiskey, and in my Instagram feed, I had seen someone mention that they had secured a rare bottle of Kentucky bourbon. And lo and behold, I go to my favorite liquor store and I see the bottle. I'm like, okay, I'm getting you for Christmas. I want to see what how this tastes.
I want to see what the hype is.
Exactly. And hey, over a bottle of whiskey or of a bottle of wine, the harrowing would be even more harrowing because it's gonna raise the hair on your necks, especially ever when you feel that buzz.
It'll be worth it.
Yeah. Hey, some horror enthusiasts, they want, well, not horror enthusiasts, I would say the casual viewer for horror films, all they appreciate is jump scares or this or that. Yeah. I think sometimes you really need to sit back, watch a film like this, like The Harrowing, and enjoy the different things that it offers: psychology, spiritual, and practical effects.
All right, well, because you just had to bring that up, Ken, I have one more thing to state then, and that is go into the Harrowing looking for that great story. Do not go into it looking to become scared, because it's just not going to happen.
It's more psychological than anything. It's not something that's going to jump scare you at every turn. It's something that's going to really get into your head and make you think, well,
am I really this person or am I not?
Yeah, interesting perspective. And on that, we're going to close it on that note. And once again, Paul, Tessa, thank you so much for joining me on DecayMag Sessions, episode 20, in which we talk The Harrowing.